It started like most bad things do on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The air in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was thick with the kind of humid heat that makes your shirt stick to your back by 10 a.m. I was there for work, a gig I'd picked up doing preliminary site surveys for a new cellular tower. Not exactly glamorous, but it paid the bills and got me out of the Columbus office for a few days. I wasn't alone. My company had sent along Maya from the architectural liaison department. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen emails over the past year, but this was the first time we'd been stuck in a car together for a 3-hour drive. From the moment I saw her waiting by her car in the company parking lot, a small wheeled suitcase beside her, I knew the trip was going to be distracting. Maya was one of those women who seemed constructed specifically to short-circuit the male brain. She had this cascade of dark, almost black hair that fell in loose waves over her shoulders, contrasting sharply with pale, flawless skin. Her cheekbones were high and sharp, and her mouth was always glossed, a soft, shimmering pink that made you wonder what it would taste like. She was wearing a simple, sleeveless white blouse and dark, tailored pants that should have looked professional, but on her they were something else entirely. The blouse was just tight enough to hint at the shape of her breasts, and when she moved to put her bag in the trunk, I caught the shift of her back muscles, the subtle curve of her waist flaring out to her hips that I had to look away, feeling a familiar low heat in my gut. This was a coworker that I needed to be professional. The drive down was a mix of awkward small talk and comfortable silence that I found my eyes drifting to the rearview mirror more than they should, just to catch a glimpse of her in the passenger seat. She had a habit of tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers long and delicate. When she shifted her legs, the fabric of her pants pulled taut across her thighs. It was ridiculous, this schoolboy fixation, but I couldn't seem to help it. We checked into the Way Motel, a tired-looking 2-story building that smelled faintly of mildew and industrial cleaner. Our rooms were adjacent. I heard her door click shut and felt a stupid pang of disappointment. "Let's go get a feel for the town," she suggested after we dropped our bags. "Get our bearings before we start tomorrow." So we walked. Point Pleasant is a small river town, the kind of place where history feels heavy. It's famous for 2 things. The 1967 Silver Bridge collapse that killed 46 people, and the Mothman. The local legend of a giant, winged, red-eyed creature that supposedly haunted the area in the months leading up to the disaster. The town had fully embraced it. There were Mothman murals, a Mothman museum, and Mothman-themed cafes. The centerpiece was the Mothman statue in the town square. It was bizarre. A sleek, metallic, almost artistic rendering of the creature, perched on a pedestal, its massive wings swept back and 2 red reflective orbs for eyes. It was meant to be a tourist attraction, but there was something unnerving about it, something alien and watchful. We were standing there, maybe 20 feet from the statue, just taking it in. The late afternoon sun was casting long, distorted shadows from the statue's wings across the paved square. Maya was squinting up at it, one hand shielding her eyes. "It's kind of creepy," she said, a slight shiver in her voice. "Those eyes feel like they're following you." I was about to make a joke, something about overactive imaginations, when I saw him. On the other side of the statue, standing perfectly still in the shadow of one of the wings, was a man. He was just looking at us, not at the statue, not at the sky, but directly at us. He was dressed in a dark, heavy-looking coat, which was strange given the stifling heat. His face was pale and oddly smooth like a mannequin's. There was no expression, no curiosity, no hostility, just a blank, unwavering stare. "You see that guy?" I murmured to Maya, nodding subtly in his direction. She followed my gaze and her body went rigid beside me. I felt the back of her hand brush against mine, a tiny accidental contact that sent a jolt up my arm. "Yeah," she whispered, "weird coat." We stood there for another minute, pretending to look at the statue, but my attention was locked on the man. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He was a statue himself, a second, more disturbing exhibit in the square. "Let's go get some dinner," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I put a hand on the small of Maya's back to guide her away. It was a professional gesture, or at least that's what I told myself. But I could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her blouse, the delicate architecture of her spine. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into the touch slightly, a quick, almost imperceptible pressure. As we walked towards a diner called the River's Edge, I glanced back. The man in the coat was gone, vanished. The space where he'd been standing was empty, the shadow of the Mothman's wing now falling on nothing but cracked pavement that a cold trickle, completely separate from the humid air, traced a path down my own spine. The diner was a time capsule from the 1950s, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that was probably just for show. We slid into a booth by the window. Maya sat across from me, and in the intimate confines of the booth, her presence was overwhelming. She kicked off her sandals under the table and I caught a glimpse of her bare feet. Her toes were painted a deep, blood red. The thin leather straps of her sandals had left faint pink indentations on the pale skin of her instep. I had a sudden, unbidden image of taking one of those feet in my hand, feeling the delicate bones. Running my thumb over the arch, I shook my head, trying to clear it. This was insane that I was getting turned on by a woman's feet while simultaneously feeling a deep, formless dread about a stranger in a coat. "You okay, Ben?" she asked, her glossy lips curving into a small, concerned smile. Her eyes, a warm hazel, searched my face. "Yeah, fine," I said, forcing a smile. That guy was weird. "Probably just a local character," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She picked up the laminated menu, her fingers tracing the edges. "This town is built on weird, right?" We ordered burgers and fries. The food was greasy and good. We talked about work, about mutual colleagues, safe, neutral topics. But the conversation felt like a thin veneer over something else. My eyes kept drifting from her face to the swell of her breasts beneath her blouse, to the way her throat moved when she swallowed her iced tea, and every time the bell above the diner door jingled, my heart would stutter, and I'd look up, half expecting to see the man in the coat. He never appeared. Later, back at the motel, we stood awkwardly between our two doors. The parking lot was poorly lit, pools of darkness gathering between the dim orange glow of the security lights. Crickets chirped a relentless chorus. "Well, big day tomorrow," I said, jangling my keys. "Yeah," Maya replied. She hugged her arms around herself, though the night was still warm. The motion pressed her breasts together, creating a shadowed cleavage that my eyes snagged on for a moment too long. "Ben, did he look familiar to you?" The question caught me off guard. "Familiar? No, why?" She shook her head, her dark hair swaying. "I don't know. It's stupid. For a second when I first saw him I thought he looked like my Uncle Carl, but he doesn't. Not really. It was just a trick of the light, I guess." She gave a weak laugh. "This town is getting to me already." "Get some sleep, Maya," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "We'll laugh about this tomorrow." She nodded, offered me a small, tired smile, and slipped into her room. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a solid thunk. Inside my own room, the air conditioning unit rattled and wheezed, doing little to cut the humidity. I took a shower, the water lukewarm and weak. As I stood under the spray, I tried to push the image of the man away, but it was replaced by the image of Maya. The way her hips had swayed slightly as she walked ahead of me back to the motel, the delicate line of her collarbone, the red polish on her toes. My hand drifted down my stomach, thoughts tangled up in a confusing mix of desire and fear. I stopped myself, feeling a flush of guilt and self-disgust. This was not the time. I fell into a fitful sleep, the rattling AC unit providing a discordant soundtrack to my dreams, which were fragmented and anxious. I was standing in the town square, but the Mothman statue was gone. In its place was the man in the coat, his red reflective eyes fixed on me, and standing next to him was Maya, but her eyes were the same solid, glowing red. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. The room was pitch black, the AC had cycled off, and in the sudden, profound silence, I heard a soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged slowly across the concrete walkway outside my door. I held my breath, my entire body tense. The scraping stopped. Then a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was close. Right outside. I slid out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, and crept to the door. I didn't turn on the light. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the world outside into a warped, orange-tinted panorama. The walkway was empty. The door to Maya's room was across from mine, a solid slab of dark wood. Nothing moved. Then, A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows near the vending machine at the end of the building that it moved into the pool of light directly in front of my door. It was him. The man in the coat that he was standing there facing my door, his hands hanging limp at his sides. His face was still that unsettling blank, but this close through the peephole I could see his eyes. They weren't red like the statues, they were just dark, deep, empty pits that he didn't move, that he just stood there, as if he knew I was watching. As if he was waiting. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone on the nightstand. I should call the front desk. Call the police? But what would I say? There's a man standing outside my room? He wasn't trying the handle, that he wasn't making a sound, that he was just standing. I looked through the peephole again. That he was gone, vanished, just like in the square. The walkway was empty. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. That I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. That I sat in the chair by the window, watching the parking lot through a slit in the curtains, my body coiled tight with a tension that was part terror, part something else. A raw, primal alertness that made every sense feel hyperacute. The next morning I looked like hell. That I met Maya outside by our rental car. She didn't look much better. There were faint purple smudges under her eyes. You okay? We both asked at the same time, which should have been funny, but it wasn't. I didn't sleep well, I admitted. Me neither, she said, her voice husky. She was wearing a loose-fitting tank top and jeans today. As she leaned against the car, waiting for me to unlock it, the position accentuated the curve of her hip, the long line of her leg. My sleep-deprived brain fixated on the way the denim hugged the shape of her thigh. It was a stupid, automatic reaction, a flare of heat in the midst of the cold fear that had settled in my stomach. Did you hear anything last night? I asked carefully, unlocking the doors. She froze, her hand on the passenger door handle. Her knuckles were white. Like what? I don't know. Sounds outside. She looked at me, her hazel eyes wide and serious. I thought I heard someone walking around, really late, but I figured it was just, the motel. We didn't talk about it further. We drove to our first survey site, an empty field on the outskirts of town. The work was mindless, methodical. We took measurements, soil samples, GPS readings. The sun climbed, beating down on us. Maya took off her light jacket, and in just the tank top I could see the elegant line of her shoulders, the smooth skin of her arms. A fine sheen of sweat made her skin glisten. I found myself staring at the nape of her neck, at the tiny damp hairs that curled there. The desire was still there, a low, persistent hum, but it was now intertwined with the paranoia. Every time a car passed on the distant road, I'd look up, my pulse quickening. Every time we were silent for too long, the memory of the scraping sound would surface. We broke for lunch at a small sub-shop. As we sat at a Formica table, Maya was scrolling through photos on her phone, showing me some of the readings we'd taken. Wait, go back, I said, my sandwich halfway to my mouth. She scrolled back a photo. It was a shot of the empty field, the measuring equipment in the foreground. There, I said, pointing to the very edge of the frame. In the tree line, at the far boundary of the property, stood a figure. A dark shape. It was too far away to make out any details, but the silhouette was unmistakable, the heavy coat, the unnaturally still posture. Maya zoomed in, the pixelated image became a blur of green and brown and a smudge of dark gray, but it was him. He was watching us from the woods. Oh God, Maya whispered, her face pale. She dropped her phone on the table as if it had burned her. Ben, what is this? I don't know, I said, my voice low. But it's not a coincidence. The rest of the workday was a write-off. We were both jumpy, distracted. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. We finished early and decided to head back to the motel. The plan was to regroup, maybe actually call the police, though I still had no idea what I would report. As we drove down Main Street, we passed the town square. I couldn't help but look. The Mothman statue stood in its usual place. And on the other side, in the same spot as yesterday, stood the man in the coat. This time he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a woman. She was also wearing a coat, a long dark one. Despite the heat, her hair was a cascade of dark waves. Her posture, the shape of her body, it was. Maya let out a small choked sound next to me. Ben, stop the car. I pulled over, my hands slick on the wheel. We both stared. The woman was Maya. An exact duplicate. Same height, same build, same hair. but her face was as blank and expressionless as the man's. She was standing there, arm brushing against the man's, both of them staring across the statue at us. I looked at the real Maya in the passenger seat. Her face was a mask of pure horror, her hand clamped over her mouth, her chest was rising and falling in rapid shallow breaths that I could see the frantic beat of her pulse in her throat. Then I looked back at the square. The man and the woman, the other Maya, were gone. The space was empty. Did you see that? Maya's voice was a thin, reedy thread. Did you see me? I saw it, I said, my own voice hoarse. That we sat in silence for a full minute, the car idling roughly, the ordinary sounds of a small town, a dog barking, a lawnmower in the distance, felt like they were coming from another planet. We need to get out of here, I said finally. Right now that we'll go back to the motel, grab our stuff, and drive back to Columbus. That we can tell the company the site was unsuitable. Anything. She just nodded, tears welling in her eyes. That I reached over and put my hand on her knee, a gesture of comfort. Her leg was tense, the muscle rigid under my palm. That I could feel the warmth of her skin through the denim. The intimacy of the touch, in the midst of this terror, was dizzying. My thumb moved, almost of its own accord, making a small, soothing circle. She didn't push me away. She placed her hand over mine, her fingers cold. That we sat like that for another moment, two people clinging to a fragment of human contact in a world that had suddenly become a funhouse mirror. Back at the 2ND way, we moved with a frantic, shared purpose. That I threw my clothes into my suitcase, not bothering to fold them. My mind was racing. Doppelgangers. That's what they were. The legends, the folklore, they all said the same thing. To see your double was an omen of death. A cold, hard knot of fear tightened in my chest. A sharp knock on my door made me jump. I peered through the peephole.